Okay, everybody, time for our last panel of the day, and we can call the panelists to the stage. Feel free to take your seats. Andy says make it through one more, and there's some beer waiting for you afterward. The next panel will be, as somebody mentioned earlier, revenue, or as in your program, taxes. And we'll call to the stage the moderator again, Mr. Chris Berg.
First off, thank you everyone for sticking around. We are going to talk about some taxes here in this session, if you will. Some four outstanding guests joining us today, so great to have you guys with us. We'll introduce you in a moment. We just want to remind you, if you've got some questions about taxes, property taxes, you can always text those to 22333, the old GNDC space, and then your question. You can start those now, and we will get to those ASAP. So with us today, we've got Senator Jim Dotson with us. He's on the Taxation Committee, so Senator, thanks for being here. Senator Dwight Cook as well. He's the chairman of the Taxation Committee. Mike Montplaisir, Cass County Administrator, and then Charlene Nelson. We all remember Measure 2, trying to get rid of the old property tax situation. All four of you, thanks so much for being here. I guess what I'd like to do, we kind of doing this most of the day. Please keep it to a minute, but just kind of an opening statement about your thoughts on where North Dakota is at right now as far as overall taxation. If you want to focus in on income or property or whatnot, obviously we'll leave it up to you. Senator Dotson, we'll start with you, sir.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you to the GNDC for the invitation. It's great to be here with you. North Dakota is a great place to do business. Everything we read, everything we hear is that North Dakota is very competitive with virtually every other state. Taxes here are low. We have broad-based taxes, and there's a relatively close balance between the sales income and property taxes that we have. For our part in the legislature, state spending over the last few sessions has concentrated on good roads, good schools, and property tax relief. These are priorities that are pretty highly supported around the state, wherever you are. But I think that this third one, property tax relief, is an issue that concerns me, and it concerns a lot of people in the legislature. It's an issue we hear about a lot when we're back home. And there's a lot of people that homeowners, retired people, farmers are all concerned about property taxes. And with today's low commodity prices, I think when you look across the state, farmers and other people that deal in commodities will have probably pay more in taxes on property than they'll have in net farm income. So many of us who are watching this and paying attention are asking, are we setting ourselves up here to repeat the mistakes of the 1980s, when we ended up at the end of that decade with taxes that were quite high, very high on property, and I hope we can avoid that by being careful about the way we manage the rest of our tax system.
Thank you. Senator Cook.
Well, thank you also for the GNDC and all you folks. I don't know if you know this, but these lights are really bright. We can't see out and see any of you. I'm going to make the assumption that the room is all full yet, and you're all excited to hear about tax policy. I can't help but think the reality is that it's probably 3/4 full, and you're just sitting here because you have nothing else to do before the social starts. But anyway, see, now we've got the truth. I got to start out with, if you've heard me on a panel before, you've heard this canned statement before, but it is a canned statement. It's really the highlight or the focus of my philosophy, my convictions of tax policy. First off, I am the chairman of the Tax Committee. You might think I like taxes. I don't. I do not like taxes. I don't like paying them. They're a burden. They're a pain in the, well, they're a burden. Our first job, I think, when we look at tax policy is we got to manage that burden. Best way to manage that burden is with a three-legged tax stool. It's income tax, which is a progressive tax, sales tax, a regressive tax, and property tax is the equalized tax. That's the best way to manage the burden that taxes place on everybody. Does that mean that you have to have the three-legged stool? No, it doesn't. There's plenty of states that don't, but if you look at it, they all tax something else if they don't tax income or sales. But we got to manage the budget. The next thing that I believe very strongly about tax policy is tax policy and our state's economy are connected at the hip. Good tax policy will drive an economy, bad tax policy will slow an economy. Uncertain tax policy will absolutely derail an economy. Uncertainty is the most important ingredient of our sound tax policy. Fairness, simplicity, but uncertainty trumps everything else. And so I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and again, thank you all for coming.
Mike?
Well, thank you for coming, inviting me. It's always interesting to talk about taxes. It's kind of a boring subject to most people, but it's part of my life, so we're used to that. On the county level, what we're concerned about is keeping the taxes as low as possible, sharing that burden fairly amongst the taxpayers, and then be open about the process and what it is that we're doing. Property tax makes up about 50% of our income, so we can't do without it. Some funds, it's as much as 80%. And people always talk about, well, just cut what it is that you're doing. Do less of it. Do it at a cheaper price. But, our biggest expenditures are in 3 areas: roads, sheriff and law enforcement, the jail, that sort of thing, and then social services. So the rest of county government doesn't really make up a lot of dollars. So when we cut, it's in those areas that are the biggest.
Thank you. Charlene?
Thank you. I too would like to thank the Chamber for putting on this event and for inviting me to speak. I feel kind of a little out of place. I'm sitting on a stage with 3 men who are very, very well informed on the issue of taxation. It kind of reminds me of that Sesame Street song, "One of these things is not like the others." These men, they spend their days passing laws, making policy, and deciding how our tax monies are going to be spent. I spend my time trying to budget and figure out how I'm going to make ends meet on what money I have left after the taxes are spent. In fact, this last week I had to make a decision on how much of my medical bills to pay so that we could afford to get our car fixed. And that's what the state cares about, is that I pay my taxes. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe that we do need taxes. We need taxes to fund good government and to fund the infrastructure that fosters commerce and prosperity. But property tax just does just the opposite, and I disagree with Senator Cook. I believe property tax is the confiscatory tax. It confiscates our properties. And here's why I think it's so bad. It's arbitrary. It's not based on what we earn or what our ability to pay, unlike the other taxes such as gas tax or specials. Those are based on how much we use government services. And then, of course, income tax is based on our income. And I can write off, when I'm figuring out my income tax, I can deduct my medical expenses, for example. Not so with property tax. Property tax has nothing to do with our ability to pay. And that's why we see so many of the elderly and the disabled losing their homes. Families who are facing medical or employment crises having to sell and move into apartments because their homes are being held hostage to this tax. And I know Mr. Montplaisir is going to tell you that not that many people lose their homes to forfeiture, and that's true. What they do is they sell their homes because they're being backed into a wall, and they're faced with that choice of either losing their home to the state or selling it and moving into an apartment. And Mr. Montplaisir and our senators, our legislators, they're okay with that because as long as the state has its steady revenue stream and government can run smoothly, and then that's their priority. Property tax is capricious. A lot of businesses pay property tax, but many don't. A lot of homeowners don't pay property tax or have an abatement or a homestead credit. In some jurisdictions, over half of the properties don't pay the tax. And property tax is confusing. No one can understand it. A few people can, but most people cannot understand property tax. Now, how many of you here know what a mill is? How many of you know how your taxes are being calculated? Who knows, do you know what the difference is between the market value, the assessed value, and the taxable value of your home? And do you know who has the authority to levy taxes on your home?
Charlene, I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to keep this the
Okay,
right direction.
one
So
more
we'll
point.
give you more time. No, what-
Because I can promise you that people who sit with Senator Dotzenrod and Senator Cook, many of them don't understand that, and they're making policies that we have to live with. And that's the difference. These,
Charlene,
I
I'm gonna
think
cut you
there's a
off.
better
Charlene,
way
I
to
don't mean
cover.
cut you off. We'll give you more time,
Okay,
okay?
all
Be
right.
respectful for everybody's time up here.
Sure.
Senator Cook, I want to give you a chance. She's making some pretty big statements, if you will. I know that you guys have done some things to reform, change property taxes. What are those things specifically, and are they working?
Well, of course, we've had the debate on property tax already. Earlier in this sessions today, Senator Wardner, I think, very eloquently explained what the Constitution says about property tax. I said it has to be, it's the equalized tax, and that's because that's in the Constitution. If we tried to base taxes for property based on what you earn, that's not equalizing. It would be unconstitutional, so we'd have to change that. Secondly, we have done a lot of things. I agree with her that property taxes have been somewhat complicated over the years. We have worked very hard in the legislature to make them more simple. We're making great strides in that area, and we'll continue to make strides in that area. But I hope there's a bigger picture that we need to talk about rather than
So what's the most important thing you've done to simplify this for North Dakotans?
Well, we simplified the tax statement so that it's easier for them to understand. I had a property owner who owned property, ag property in 3 different counties. He had 3 different property tax statements. I tried to explain all 3 to him, and I had a struggle. So we're getting uniformity in our property tax statements. Increasing the assessor training has helped a lot, too. We're still working on another issue. We got the truth in taxation that we passed back in, I think, 2011, which requires any taxing entity that's going to raise your taxes in dollars, that they notify you, put an ad to paper. Now they're sending out letters. The biggest challenge we've had with property taxes, and this is where we really corrected, is you could talk to a legislator, and we talked about property taxes, the burden as a percentage of market value. It's 1.5% of market value. We lowered it. If you talk to a county commissioner, he'll say, we just cut your taxes by 20 mils. When in fact, if the assessed value went up, the taxpayer is paying more in dollars. We all got to get talking the same language here, and it comes down to the dollars you're paying, and that's the language we've got to talk, and we're moving in that direction.
Senator Dotzenrod, for you, when you look at the state now buying down property taxes roughly 80%, many people say that, first of all, do you agree with that? Do you think that's a good thing?
Well, I think it is a good thing for the state to be participating and helping. It's sort of like revenue sharing, and when revenue sharing has been on the ballot, the public overwhelmingly supports that. When the state is in a strong financial position and the local governments are having trouble finding the revenue, I think it's good. The services, by and large, that are being paid for and that the state is helping for are not a private benefit. They're a public benefit for a public service that's used by the public at large. So I think you can make the argument that having the state come in and help, not abolish or remove. I think you have to have local participation, and that needs to be so that the local folks recognize that there is a share of that cost. But I do think that the states can play a role in helping reduce the taxes on property.
So what do you say to people? I think the biggest challenge I hear is that we feel like we're being sold that, hey, this is property tax relief, when really you're taking money from one pocket and just putting it in another, state taxes, and subsidizing local taxes. So what's your comment on that?
Well, I think you're talking about the phenomena where if a local tax goes down because the state helps pay for it, then the local governments will start finding other things to spend money on to fill that reduction. Is that the point
Essentially,
you're
but even what we've been sold or told is, hey, this is property tax relief. And some people have absolutely seen property tax relief. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I think there's a better way to say, hey, look, the state's going to take your state tax dollars or state tax dollars and buy down local property taxes, not being sold as, i.e., tax relief. So just your thoughts on when people say, wait a second, aren't you just taking money from one pocket and putting it into another?
Well, it's all public money. If a public service needs to get paid for at the local level, there's a question of who should pay for it. Some of these things we've been looking at, we think the state has a responsibility that's higher than the local levels. And in this last session, the social services, which we feel, if you look across the state, some parts of the state have significantly higher social services costs. Should that be the responsibility of those homeowners in that area to be paying a larger tax to support that? We think that that's really probably a burden that appropriately belongs to everyone in the state. The state has moved in now and we're covering for now the program costs of social services, and then there is a question in the future about other social services.
Senator Cook, great question that came in. You look at, I'm sure you're well aware of what China did to their currency recently. Means they're going to be buying less oil. Iran's going to put more oil on the market. Like Senator Armstrong said, you can see futures now in 40s, even 30s. What happens if the state cannot continue this buy down of property taxes?
Well, Chris, that's something the legislature has always been deeply concerned of as we passed it, the sustainability of it. We voted for it with the belief that we can sustain it, and I have that confidence right now yet that we can sustain it. What happens if we find ourselves where we cannot? What happens hypothetically if that happens? God forbid it does. We're going to have to look at where to get some revenue. It's as simple as that. But we have done everything we've done with the full belief that we can sustain what we have put in place.
And when you say go get that revenue, from where specifically?
Well, I don't even give any thought to that. And I hope the day never comes where I have to. I've never raised a tax in my life.
But that's my point. My point is, though, if you look at oil prices, clearly, I don't see any reason right now why they're going to go back up to $90. Iran, China cut their currency, consumption's down, economies across the globe are not as what they are in America. So knowing that we've about 80%, and we all know that educators love to have more and more money come into their coffers, what do we do if we go, whoa, wait a second, oil's not doing what we thought it was going to do, we can't really afford this. Commodity prices are down all over the place.
Chris, it wasn't that long ago, the biennium, all we got for oil revenue was about $1.5 billion. It wasn't that long ago. 4 years maybe, 6 years? We're still projected to get close to around $4 billion this year. Production is over 1 million barrels, so even at $30 a barrel, if it gets that low, times 1 million, and from what you hear from the oil producers is they're going to try to keep that production up. So it's a combination of both things, but we're going to have plenty of revenue yet. I really do believe it, and I do believe that what we've done in property tax relief and income tax relief is sustainable.
Can I say something?
Please.
On that? Just as we talk about diversity in tax revenues and tax revenue streams, we should also be talking about an economic diversity. We should be, instead of focusing all our attention on oil or even agriculture, we should be diversifying. And abolishing property taxes does just that. It's the mechanism that most counties and cities use to draw in new businesses and industry, is to give them a tax abatement. And studies have shown that regions who do that enjoy a greater and more diverse economic development than those who continue to employ that property tax as a main revenue stream.
Mr. Montplaisir, I think one question, I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but what percentage of properties in Cass County don't pay property taxes?
If you're talking governmental entities and that sort of thing, I think we've worked out to be about a third of the properties don't pay a property tax, but that's including, NDSU and all the other government agencies, including the U.S. government.
So are you including nonprofits as well into that, or?
Anybody who doesn't pay a property tax.
Okay. It's about
Roughly
a
is about a third.
Charlene, I want to give you a chance to comment on that.
Again, why do we allow some businesses, some homeowners to be exempt and others have to pay and shoulder that burden? I think, if we're talking about a fair tax, it's a tax that everyone pays.
Senator Cook, you're shaking your head yes?
Well, when it comes to homes not paying tax, the only homes I think of are farm homes. And Senator Dotson and I will go around on this, but I've been trying to eliminate that tax exemption for some time now. I think that farms should be taxed. I agree that everybody should tax it. We've had an ongoing debate in the legislature. It's a topic that we're discussing is the amount of exempt property. We're studying it in an interim. But also if you look at the nonprofits, Blue Cross Blue Shield's a nonprofit.
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
But they pay property tax. They pay property tax. There's a line there, and basically what that line is, if you can contribute money to the nonprofit and deduct it on your federal income tax, then that nonprofit is exempt from property tax. Should we move that line? Should we look at the amount of income that the nonprofit gets from non-giving? There's nonprofits out there that are generating business and making considerable revenue. Should we look at nonprofits? Churches, for example, should they at least pay for fire protection and police protection? They enjoy the benefit of fire and church protections. We've been having those discussions. We haven't found the political will yet to find a solution to make some changes. but it's a topic that's on the table. So we're having those discussions, and it's a topic we got to discuss and hash out.
Senator Dotson, I want to get to the farm thing in a moment if we can, but Mr. Montplaisir, I think I cut you off. What were you going to say, sir?
The other class of property or homeowners who don't pay a lot of property taxes are those who are under homestead credit. And they qualify that based on the fact that they don't have a lot of income. And then veterans credit. Disabled veterans who have a 50% or greater disability get some reduction on their property tax. And, we can say, well, that's not fair to the person next door, but on the other hand, we want to try to protect the poorest people that we can.
And say it again, Charlene?
New home construction is exempt for depending on the program, for 2 to 3 years.
Do you want to comment on that, sir?
And that's on a certain value, usually the first $200,000 of a new home. And it's a program to stimulate new housing, and it's been working fairly well.
Local discretion.
Senator
Well,
Dotson?
just a comment on, you earlier asked, what's going to happen if we run short of money? How are we going to keep this property tax relief? And I think the other priorities, good schools and good roads, too. I mean, in the last session, I voted against cutting the income tax because I saw no interest in that at all in my legislative district. The last time it was on the ballot, the people voted it down. I was thinking the same thing that many are. Whereas if we do run short, it's going to be very difficult to find the votes to raise income tax back. But that was a case of a tax that I think that if we want to protect those spending priorities, good schools, good roads, and property tax relief, we should look out for the health of the general fund and keep those general fund revenues. Now, if you had an income tax that was high, one of the highest, or if we had an issue that this was a problem, then we should deal with it. But having one of the lowest income taxes in the nation, there was no reason to do that.
So let me ask you this, since you're on the Taxation Committee, and
Yeah.
Senator Cook, you might want to take this one as well. So you look at the income tax that's coming in. I don't know how many people work in that particular area of in our government that facilitate income taxes, but is there a point where it becomes almost cost prohibitive? Hey, we're bringing in X, we've got all these employees that are dealing with this, and it just doesn't even make any sense.
Which one? You want to take
Yes,
that?
we're not there yet. But there is a point where, income tax gets so low that you might as well take it to zero and find something to replace that income. But you keep things simple. I'd rather see us make it simpler
But
than anything.
that's my other question. You said something to replace that income. There's this misnomer that if you cut my income taxes, I'm going to go hide that money underneath my mattress. I'm going to go spend it. I'm going to go buy dinners, go to movies, buy things. You're going to get your tax one way or the other.
I think the answer, from my point of view, is if you keep taxes balanced between the big three, property, income, and sales, you can keep your taxes fairly low. But if you eliminate one, and there are several, I think there's 7 states with no income tax. If you look at those 7 states, they've all found other things to tax. They have, in 2 of the states, they've got kind of a business tax that's based on numbers of employees or your total general revenue before any deductions. They all have 2 things in common. They have high sales tax, 60 to 70% of their revenues on sales, and they have high property tax. And I would much rather have us keep a moderate, low level of tax that's spread out amongst the 3 and go with that. And that would be my strategy to keep our taxes low.
Senator Cook, one of the big conversations here obviously has been about workforce. Do you see a strategy, a formula, a way to utilize tax levers to bring more people into this state?
Well, we keep taxes low is one way. Eliminating some income tax could be another way. I don't know. I think we had quite a conversation I had last interim. I was actually asking some people that I have a lot of respect for if now is the right time for North Dakota to eliminate their income tax so we would draw some workers. And in one of those conversations, the concept of what would the military retirees do. We have a whole lot of them, thank you to our president that's going to be retiring here. And where do they go? Trust me, guys in the military know what a state tax income tax rate is. They know how to quickly file their income taxes, have residency in a state with no income tax. So they know I think it's 9 states that don't have anything. So they know who those 9 states are. But I think that military retirees also look at some recreational activities, hunting. We have that, but they also look at climate. And we're going to probably lose on that ballot unless they like to snow ski. But yeah, we're having these discussions. income tax for the workforce development is a concern we have, and there are ongoing discussions.
Want to remind you to send your text into 22333 GNDC space and then your question, please. One other thing, Mr. Montplaisir, for you, I think one of the things that's tough is, these people are business owners, they're busy, they got a lot going on. Any suggestions on what people can do to better hold county people, local people accountable when it comes to spending?
Well, we try to be as open as we can. If you go to our website lately, we've partnered last year with OpenGov. We put all our financial statements out there. Something new this year, we've done a budget milestones. So what went up on our website last week was our 2016 proposed budget. People can go and they can look and see how much revenue we're getting from taxes, how much we're getting from the state, what we're spending in each department, what we're spending it on in each department. Other than that, we do try to keep people informed. The tax statement has been revised. We do publish a truth in taxation notice if we're going over the zero number of mills calculation. And a number of years ago, we started putting on the effective tax rate on the tax statement, and now it's been mandated statewide so that people can see at a glance. And people ask me, well, what does that really mean? And I think when we first started talking property tax reform, it was over 2% of value. We've got some places in Cass County now that are under 1% of value as far as what they're paying in taxes. And I always tell them, if that number's going down, it's a good thing. If it's going up, it's not so good. So if your value went up and your tax went up, but your effective tax rate went down, that's showing that the system is working.
Senator Dotson-Rod, we'll go with you here. The corporate tax I pay is outrageous. If I paid less, my employees would get more and hence spend more. Any thoughts on the corporate tax rate?
Well, maybe others want to comment. It's always been my understanding that corporate taxes in our state are fairly low. I do get to work with some taxpayers on some tax issues and see some tax returns, but I'm not directly acquainted with the corporate taxes. And of course, it can vary greatly from one corporation, one kind of corporation, whether they're doing business in other states or if it's a local business here. But the perception I've had with people who form corporations is that they've done it for tax reasons. There's a benefit there.
Well, and I think that was my next question. Senator Cook, we'll go with you here. A lot of people here say, hey, look, corporations don't really pay taxes. They just pass those expenses on to the consumers. So why not just get rid of the corporate tax?
Well, I would disagree with that. They do pay taxes. It's money that they can't spend on other things.
Yeah, but my point is all they're doing is taking that base cost of taxes and going, okay, Mrs. Jones, now I'm going to charge you more so I can make sure I can pay this.
Well, if you're the only person that's selling whatever it is you're selling, you might get by with that. But all my life's in business, I always had somebody to compete with. And what I was selling things for had nothing to do with my cost. My profit had to do with what my cost was. What I was selling things for was what the market allowed me to sell things for. But back to corporate income tax, you asked a question earlier about is there a time where we should get rid of taxes? If you want to look at the expense burden in determining what your corporate tax rate is, I would argue that in corporate America, corporations probably spend more money in determining what their tax liability is and then probably defending over litigation that their determination is the right determination than they do in corporate income tax. So, but we did change, that person agrees. We do have the lowest corporate tax rate of any state in the nation that taxes corporate income tax. There are states, Senator Dotson-Rod talked about this, that don't have a corporate income tax. They'll claim they don't have a personal income tax, but they got that business tax. And some of these business taxes, it's on revenue. I mean, you're losing money and you're still paying taxes to the state. The other thing we did last session that has to do with corporate income tax that is so important, it's probably the most important policy that we've passed as far as economic development in the state, is we changed the apportionment factor on how much of your corporate income, if you're a nationwide company, how much of your corporate income is actually taxable in North Dakota. We changed that apportionment factor as all other states that have surrounded us have. We're now a competitive state again. I can tell you Bobcat, New Platte, and West Fargo, they were looking at Moorhead, Minnesota. God help us if Minnesota ever outshines us on tax policy. We corrected it. Microsoft is hiring 200 new people in Fargo. That was the biggest thing we've ever done in corporate income tax, and it's going to reduce a lot of people's corporate income tax.
Interesting comment. Well done. Interesting comment here. Mr. Montplaisir, we'll start with you. It says there needs to be a centralized property tax database to compare communities. Your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, we do have a sort of that county by county right now. And years ago, we first put that out on the web. People told us, well, you're going to see a lot of discrepancies. You're going to have a lot of complaints. And we really don't see that. What we do see is people do compare within their neighborhoods and within other communities. But you know, a house selling in Fargo is not the same as a house selling in Kindred or in Leonard. You're paying more because you have more services, you have more amenities, you're closer to work, all of those different things. So it's more difficult on property to compare them statewide than it is anything else.
Senator Dotson, are you going to make a comment?
Well, you know, the Constitution and our state law, we require that the properties have to be within 10% of the actual selling prices, market value of the home. So that's our challenge. I mean, that's what the assessment process should do if we're doing it right. And we're tightened that up some. We're trying to assure that there's better training, and you know, that's always a work in progress, is to try to identify what's something really worth.
So what's your strategy to help improve that?
Well, Senator Cook and I really, we were on opposite sides on this one in the last session, but he was successful, and we got a bill passed that provided more training. There's going to be more centralized training organized out of the tax department for all of the local tax directors out there. We have 53 counties, each has their own director of tax equalization, but within those counties we have assessors that are rural assessors, township assessors, and city assessors. Now they're going to have to, under these new rules, get a higher level of training, and it's all about trying to get everybody on the same page.
Charlene.
And I'd like to comment. Ooh, I think I have, oh, there it is. I'd like to comment on that, because that 70 hours training, 90% of our state is rural, is townships, and I live in a township. And I attended our tax equalization board where they were discussing this 70-hour training requirement. Our township can't afford it. We cannot afford to get our assessor trained for 70 hours. And so we're going to have to hire Vanguard, and Vanguard will charge us $125 for every property, which means we are guaranteed that every year our taxes will go up a minimum of $125 just to cover this new requirement that the state imposed on our township.
Yes, sir.
Not exactly. What the county has done, in Cass County at least, we've offered to the townships that we would pay half of the cost of an outside firm coming in and doing a one-time assessment of all of the houses and businesses in the township. And we would finance the other half of the cost over a number of years. We've also hired an additional assessor in the county, because we do a lot of jurisdictions ourselves. We do some townships and some cities. And so, you know, we're making that offer out there. We've had a number of them sign up. We would like to do them all at one time, but we can't because the outside firm, you know, they have a schedule too, and you know, we're probably 2-3 years out on some things. But we're trying to do that. We're trying to make it more equitable. We'll be hopefully building a database on our website of those property cards once they're all completed. So we're doing what we can, and we're trying to assist the cities and the townships that can't afford to hire their own assessors.
Senator Dotson, I want to get your thoughts. Senator Cook said that you both may disagree, obviously, on the way farms are taxed. Just your thoughts on that situation. And you talked about commodity prices being down. Anything that you see from a tax level perspective to continue to help farmers?
Well, I do think that this December, when those tax statements come out, there's a lot of rural legislators are going to really hear about it, because the tax bills for most farmers who are commercially successful, viable farms at average farm size in North Dakota of around 1,200 acres, you know, at $10 an acre, there will be many that will be above and some below, but they're going to be getting a pretty large bill. And this is a year when most people are not going to make any money. So we're going to hear about that. So the question is, you know, most rural taxing districts, the real gorillas in the room, the real large taxpayers are these farm ag land property within a typical rural taxing district, whether it's a school district or a county or some other taxing district. So what we're seeing in these taxing districts is, over the last few years with strong commodity prices, is the share of taxes paid by ag land is going up. The share of property tax paid by urban owners within that taxing are going down. So we are in a situation now where these taxes on rural property on ag land have gotten high, and they're quite high. And to add to that now the tax on the home, when they're already paying more taxes than the other taxpayers within that taxing district. And I think if the money was there, if the revenue was there, if they had those kind of years that we've had some great years here, but those are over with, and the boom in ag is over with. And right now, I think it'd be very hard for me, and I think a lot of legislators, to go out and say it's time to start taxing these farm homes, when those people are already paying, in most taxing districts, the largest share of the taxes collected.
If anyone else has any other comments or questions, again, I want you to text 22333 GNDC space and then your question. But with that, we started much earlier. I want to kind of begin to just wrap things up with your final comments. And Charlene, it's great to have you up here, sort of a, the layperson, if you will. So as you look into the 2017 session, if you had a magic wand, what would you like to see come out of that session?
Well, my magic wand, of course, would include abolishing property tax. I just think it's such a regressive tax. And it punishes people for improving their properties. It disincentivizes expansion and businesses from coming in. We want to diversify our economy, and abolishing property tax would do just that. That's kind of the difference here. I think that there's a better way to fund our government. Now, Senator Dotson-Rod spoke about our priorities being education and roads. I agree 100%. Education can be paid for 100% out of the School Lands Trust Fund, and roads can be paid by gas tax. And that leaves very little net left to be funded by property tax. It can be done. I believe that the strength in our state is with the families, and that families need to come first. Their budgets need to come first before the government budgets. And I speak for the families.
Thank you. Mr. Ron Placer.
Well, it's interesting. When we had a sales tax vote, I heard the sales tax was the most regressive tax. But what would I like to see out of the next legislative session?
Just that, or just kind of your closing comments now to have a couple minutes each, but just your overall thoughts on where we're at here. And yeah, if you said kind of a magic wand for 2017, what would it be?
Well, we're interested in getting the things that don't relate to property off the property tax, and that's why we're very interested in the legislature's partial funding of social services for 2016, and hopefully in some future session they can take over the entire funding of social services, because that really doesn't relate to the property tax. The other thing I want to make a comment on is people say, well, my house went up in value 5% and my taxes went up 5%. And you got to stop to think that the things that caused your house to go up 5% also causes our expenses, whether it's salaries or benefits or buying asphalt for roads or buying fuel for patrol cars. They also go up by at least 5% and sometimes more. So we're always playing a catch-up game. Our county commissioners are very interested in not levying any more dollars than they need to. But on the other hand, they're also very mindful that we want to be able to provide the services that are required.
Senator Cook.
Well, let's not forget that the only true way to get tax relief is you reduce government. That's the only way you're going to do it. If you don't reduce the expense, you need the dollars to pay for that expense. And tax relief that somebody might see is just nothing more than tax shift. It's either shifting it to another tax or it's shifting it to another taxpayer. North Dakotans, I think for a large part, they have a trouble connecting, especially with property tax. Property tax pays for local government. There's a hard time to connect, they have a hard time connecting increased services to increased property taxes. I sat down at a coffee table, my friends were all saying, we want snow gates like Bismarck. I said, you can have snow gates like Bismarck if you're willing to pay more property taxes. But don't vote for snow gates and then come to me complaining about your property taxes. You got to make the connection, folks. And that's what it is. We're continuing to cut taxes in North Dakota. We've continually reduced the budget. We've been in a fortunate situation because we got a big golden goose putting a lot of money in our coffers. We're going to continue, I hope, in that stage, but we're road to perfection is always under the construction. We've been down a journey, we're going to stay down it.
Senator Dotson-Rod.
Well, we have been a low-tax state. We are a low-tax state today. I think that those spending priorities, good roads, good schools, and property tax relief, it's really a question that the individual voters, the citizens, the people that I talk to when I'm out campaigning, and those of us that are in the legislature, I think those are the questions that they have to be weighed by the people in this room and by the people across the state. How important are those priorities? Good schools, good roads, property tax relief. That's where, if you look at where the money that we've been spending these last few sessions when we've had some money, that's where have been the priorities. And if those aren't important enough to justify the taxes we have, then we'll have to make some changes. But everything I hear, people want those priorities. They're important to them. They're willing to pay the taxes to support good roads, good schools, and to have some property tax relief.
I want to thank all four of you for being here. We can give them a big round of applause, please, for spending their time with us today. Thank you. I think Tom's going to come back up and wrap it up, eh?
We'll just have you guys hold tight just for a moment, and then Andy has a small thanks for you. Thanks to all of you for taking part in this year's Policy Summit. It's time for one last instant poll question. We'll answer that, and then I'll tell you about free beer. Probably enough said there. In terms of property tax, do you feel you are paying too much? You can text the keyword GNDC 22, 23, 24, 25, or 26 to the number 22333. And no, the reforms and relief have worked. No, but not because of anything the legislature did, but done locally. Yes, our current method of reform is not working. Yes, but I understand that it pays for the services I use and want, and I don't think the state should be involved in a local tax. All right, interesting to see your reactions up here on the stage. A couple of thank yous. First, how about a hand for the Chamber for putting on this event once again? And a special thanks, I'm told Susan Dow worked harder than anyone, so a round of applause for Susan for her work with the Chamber. And of course, I know Andy Peterson probably will not want me to say anything, but I appreciate, I'm sure you all do, his efforts as well to put on these wonderful summits, informative for all of us. So thanks, Andy, for your work as well. Same place you grab lunch. There's going to be free beer, so you're welcome to get together for a refreshment. It's pretty hot out there, I'm told by Too Tall Tom Szymanski, so I'm sure a cool drink will feel pretty good. And get together, talk over the day. I know we also want to announce the theme for next year, so if we could take a look at that before you sneak out. It'll be August 23rd at the Ramkota, and the 2015 Policy Summit, so mark that on your smartphone while you have the chance. Thanks again for a wonderful day here, and now go have some fun. Thank you.